Hey all, Jason Levon, priest at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Welcome to another edition of Pause and Pray. When I was preparing for ordination to the priesthood, I had to spend some time working as a hospital chaplain, and I did that work at a big hospital in Chicago. And I remember one of my very first times I was ever called, when I was on call to respond to an emergency. It happened to be a young couple who wanted to see a chaplain because they had just received the devastating news that she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I was scared out of my mind to go respond to them, if I'm being honest. I was confused at all sorts of levels. Personally, I had no idea what to say or do. What does anyone say or do in that kind of situation? And I thought somehow that was my responsibility, being so new to ministry. I also had the kind of macro level confusion that suffering and tragedy brings to us all, where we find ourselves wondering, why must this happen in life? To people through no fault or choice of their own, and why does such darkness and struggle exist in life? Now, selfishly speaking, I did finally make my way to their room, and I thought I could get out of all of that confusion when I discovered that they were Hindu. And I offered to them to find somebody of the Hindu faith who could better minister to them. Again, I was really just trying to get out of all of the confusion. And that's when the young woman did something remarkable and beautiful. She stretched out her hand to take mine and pull me into that confusion. She pulled me towards one side of the bed and her partner towards the other, and she looked at me and she said, "No, please don't find anybody else. We will take whatever love and prayer we can get right now. We're not really that concerned where it comes from." And she pulled me into that confusion. And there the three of us sat in still confusion for what seemed like forever. And after a lot of uncomfortable silence, she squeezed my hand and looked at me and said, "Thank you so much. You've done more for us than you could ever imagine." I think she did more for me than I could ever imagine, because she had the courage to pull me into some holy confusion. And that became a very holy moment for me in my life of faith. It's revealed to me what much of ministry has been about. One of the great gifts and blessings for me as a priest is the way in which I've been pulled into the confusion of others over these past nearly 14 years I've been a priest. And it happens in all sorts of ways. Sometimes I'm pulled as a priest into the confusion of others when they're facing the confusion brought about by a medical diagnosis, like this young couple in the hospital. Still others will pull me into the confusion of a relationship that's unraveled. And they're trying to sift through, not knowing why it unraveled or if it can even be put back together again. Still others might be sifting through vocational confusion as they're living life in a certain way, and something happens that leads them to question if what they've really been after and what they've really been seeking are things that their heart really wants to be after and seek in life. Maybe it's all of that confusion I find myself pulled into as a priest on a regular basis, or just the confusion that exists around this pandemic. But I found myself coming back to a prayer in the Book of Common Prayer many times over these past few weeks. It's a prayer for the human family, and it goes like this. It speaks of God's ability to work through confusion as it prays, "O God, you have made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne." It's that prayer and those experiences I've had that lead me to pause and pray about the way in which I've experienced God working through the confusion of life. We find ourselves now moving into the middle of Holy Week. And it's a week that that leads to a lot of confusion. And we see throughout this Holy Week, as we enter into its story, how different people responded to that confusion. Some responded by condemning it and wishing it dead. Others, like Peter, responded to the confusion by denying it and just trying to get away from it, much like I did in that hospital room years ago. Still others found themselves responding to the confusion by being unexpectedly pulled into it, like Simon of Cyrene, who was pulled into helping Jesus carry his cross. And still others responded to it by looking at Jesus dying on the cross with great confusion and thinking, how can that be the Messiah if he's there hanging, dying such a shameful death? And yet the story we enter into this week is a story of God's ability to settle into all of that confusion, to enflesh a love that remains so steady in the midst of it all, even forgiving us in the midst of it all. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And ultimately working in all of that confusion to surface redemption and life and hope and possibility. Again, I find myself invited to pause and pray about the way I've experienced that gift and mystery over and over again. Whether it's the ways in which I've been pulled into the holy confusion of others as a priest, or even in my own life. I think of marriage and how that's a confusing journey at times. And yet giving thanks to God for the ways in which my confusion has brought me closer to Christy and opened me up in vulnerability and honesty. And I invite you to pause and pray about the same. And maybe as a result, we find ourselves coming to a deeper, more holy state of confusion, if that can be said, as we touch just how great and beautiful and marvelous and deep and mysterious and untethered God's love and desire for redemption really and truly is. And to think that love and that desire for redemption extends even to me. What a holy and marvelous and confusing gift that is to ponder. God's peace and blessings to you all.